The moonlight cast long shadows across the wooden floor of the old cabin. Inside, a young woman named Ruby pressed her back against the door, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Her hands shook as she listened to the angry voices outside getting closer. The men who had taken her from her family's farm 3 days ago were drunk again, and tonight felt different. Tonight felt dangerous. Ruby had been washing dishes by the creek when they came. 5 rough men on horses, led by a cruel man with scars across his face. They said her father owed them money, but Ruby knew her father was an honest farmer who never gambled or borrowed from bad people. These men were liars, and they wanted something else entirely. For 3 days they had kept her locked in this old cabin deep in the forest. They brought her water and stale bread, but mostly they left her alone while they drank and played cards outside. Ruby had spent every moment looking for a way to escape. The windows were too small, and they had nailed boards across them anyway. The door was thick and heavy, with a strong lock on the outside. But tonight, she had noticed something. The smallest window in the back room had one loose board. During the day, while the men were away hunting, she had worked at it with a bent spoon she found on the floor. Her fingers were bleeding and sore, but the board was finally loose enough to pull away. The voices outside grew louder. Ruby heard bottles breaking and angry shouting. Her stomach twisted with fear. She knew she could not wait any longer. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept to the back room and began working on the loose board. It creaked and groaned, but finally came free with a soft crack. The window was barely big enough for her to squeeze through. But Ruby was small and desperate. She pushed her shoulders through first, then wiggled the rest of her body until she dropped onto the soft earth below. Her dress caught on a nail and tore, but she did not care. She was free. The forest around the cabin was thick and dark. Ruby had no idea which direction led home, but she knew she had to get as far away as possible before the men discovered she was gone. She picked a direction and began to run, branches scratching her face and arms as she pushed through the undergrowth. Behind her, she heard a door slam open and angry shouts. They had found the empty cabin. Ruby ran faster, her bare feet slipping on wet leaves and sharp rocks. She could hear them crashing through the forest behind her, their voices getting closer. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she kept running. The trees seemed to go on forever. Every shadow looked like a man reaching for her. Every sound made her jump. She stumbled over fallen logs and splashed through small streams, but she never stopped moving. The men were still behind her, and their voices carried through the night air like the howling of wolves. As the hours passed, Ruby's strength began to fail. Her feet were cut and bleeding. Her torn dress caught on every thorn and branch. She was cold, scared, and completely lost. But still she kept moving, driven by the terror of what would happen if they caught her just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Ruby heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of horses. The men had gone back for their horses and were now hunting her on horseback. She would never be able to outrun them now. Panic gave her new energy, and she ran faster than she had all night. But her foot caught on a root, and she went tumbling down a steep slope, rolling through thorns and sharp stones until she landed in a heap at the bottom of a ravine. Pain shot through her ankle, and when she tried to stand, she nearly fainted. Sound of horses was getting closer. Ruby crawled behind a large rock and tried to make herself as small as possible. Through the thorns and branches above, she could see the shapes of men on horses moving slowly through the forest. They were looking for her tracks, and she knew it would not be long before they found her hiding place. Her ankle throbbed with pain, and she could barely move. Even if she could run, there was nowhere to go. The ravine was deep, with steep rocky walls on both sides. She was trapped, and the men would find her soon. Ruby closed her eyes and tried not to cry. She thought of her parents back on the farm, probably worried sick about where she was. She thought of her little brother who always made her laugh, and her older sister who taught her how to braid her hair. She might never see them again. The sound of hoofbeats stopped directly above her hiding place. Ruby held her breath and pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the rock. She could hear the men talking in low voices, discussing which way she might have gone. One of them dismounted and began walking around, looking at the ground. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they would hear it. A bird called somewhere in the distance, and the wind rustled the leaves above. Everything seemed too quiet, too. Still, Ruby squeezed her eyes shut and prayed they would move on without finding her. But then she heard footsteps coming down into the ravine. Heavy boots crunching on dry leaves, getting closer to her hiding place. Ruby knew her time was up. In a few moments, they would drag her back to that horrible cabin. And this time they would make sure she could never escape again. She opened her eyes and saw a shadow moving toward her through the morning mist. This was it. After running all night through the dangerous forest, after fighting so hard to get away, they had found her. Ruby closed her eyes again and waited for rough hands to grab her and pull her from her hiding place. The shadow stopped just a few feet away from Ruby's hiding place. She could hear breathing, slow and careful, different from the harsh panting of the men who had been chasing her. This person was not running or rushing. They were being quiet and gentle, like someone who did not want to scare a frightened animal. Ruby opened her eyes just a crack and saw boots. But these were not the same rough, dirty boots worn by her captors. These were well-made leather boots, worn but cared for, with silver spurs that caught the morning light. Above the boots were dark pants and a long coat that moved softly in the breeze. A voice spoke so quietly it was almost a whisper. "Easy there, miss. I'm not going to hurt you." The voice was deep but kind, nothing like the harsh voices of the men who had taken her. Ruby looked up and saw a face that made her catch her breath. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes the color of coffee and dark hair that curled slightly under his worn cowboy hat. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting at far horizons. There was something gentle about him, something that made Ruby feel safe, even though she had never seen him before. He crouched down slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "My name is Jake, miss. I heard all that commotion up there and figured someone might need help. Are you hurt?" His eyes took in her torn dress, her scratched face, and the way she was holding her ankle. Ruby tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Her throat was dry from running and fear. Jake reached into his coat and pulled out a small water bottle. "Here, take a sip. Small ones now, don't drink too fast." The water was cool and clean, better than anything Ruby had tasted in days. As she drank, Jake kept watching the top of the ravine, listening carefully. Ruby could still hear voices up there, but they seemed to be moving away. "Those men up there," Jake said quietly, "they the ones who hurt you?" Ruby nodded, unable to speak. Jake's jaw tightened, and something hard flashed in his kind eyes. "Well, they're not going to hurt you anymore. I promise you that." He stood up and whistled softly. A moment later, a beautiful black horse appeared at the edge of the ravine, looking down at them. The horse was sleek and strong, with a white star on its forehead and intelligent eyes. "That's Thunder," Jake said. "He's going to help us get you out of here." Ruby shook her head and pointed to her ankle. "Can't walk," she whispered. Jake nodded. "I figured as much from the way you're sitting. Don't worry about that." He moved closer, still keeping his movements slow and gentle. "I'm going to have to carry you up out of here. Is that all right?" Ruby looked into his eyes and saw nothing but kindness and concern. She nodded. Jake bent down and scooped her up as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. His arms were strong and steady, and he smelled like leather and horses in the wide-open sky. Carrying Ruby, Jake climbed up out of the ravine with sure, careful steps. Thunder had moved to meet them, and Jake lifted Ruby onto the horse's back. Before swinging up behind her, "Hold on to the saddle horn," he told her. "Thunder's got the smoothest gait in 3 counties, but I want you to feel safe." As they rode away from the ravine, Ruby could see the men who had been chasing her in the distance. They were still searching, but they were going the wrong direction now. Jake guided Thunder through the trees with expert skill, following paths that Ruby could not even see. "Where are we going?" Ruby asked, her voice still weak. "There's a town about 10 miles south of here," Jake said. "Got a doctor there who can look at that ankle, and a sheriff who will want to hear about those men. But first, we're going to my place." It's not far, and you need food and rest before we do anything else." Ruby felt herself relaxing for the first time in days. Something about Jake made her feel completely safe. Maybe it was the gentle way he spoke, or the careful way he handled his horse, or just the feeling that here was a man who would never hurt anyone who did not deserve it. They rode through beautiful country, with rolling hills and wide meadows full of wildflowers. The morning sun was warm on Ruby's face, and the fear that had been with her for 3 days was finally starting to fade. Jake did not ask her questions or push her to talk. He just let her rest against him as thunder carried them both toward safety. After about an hour, they came to a small ranch nestled in a valley between 2 hills. There was a neat wooden house with a covered porch, a red barn, and several fenced pastures where horses grazed peacefully. Everything looked well cared for and peaceful. "Welcome to the Double J Ranch," Jake said, as he helped Ruby down from Thunder. "It's not much, but it's home." Ruby looked around at the clean buildings and beautiful land. "It's wonderful," she said, and meant it. After 3 days in that horrible cabin, this place looked like paradise. Jake helped her up the porch steps and into the house. The inside was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful rugs on the wooden floors. Everything was clean and organized, not what Ruby had expected from a man living alone. "Let me get that ankle looked at," Jake said, helping Ruby to sit in a big, comfortable chair. He knelt down and gently examined her swollen ankle, his touch careful and professional. "It's not broken, but it's badly sprained. You're going to need to stay off it for a few days." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "I need to get home. My family will be so worried. They don't know where I am or what happened to me." Jake stood up and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll get word to your family today, I promise. But right now, you need to heal. Those men might still be out there looking for you, and you're not safe to travel until that ankle is better." Ruby nodded, knowing he was right. Jake went to the kitchen and came back with a plate of food and a cup of coffee. The food was simple but delicious, and Ruby realized she had not eaten a real meal in days. As she ate, Jake sat nearby and told her about his ranch and his horses. His voice was soothing, and Ruby found herself forgetting all about her troubles as she listened to him talk about the land he loved. Over the next 3 days, Ruby stayed at the Double J Ranch while her ankle healed. Jake had sent word to the sheriff about the men who had kidnapped her, and also managed to get a message to her family that she was safe. Ruby's parents had sent back word that they were grateful beyond measure and would come for her as soon as it was safe to travel. During those 3 days, Ruby learned that Jake was nothing like any man she had ever known. He was gentle and kind, but also strong and capable. Every morning he would bring her breakfast and check on her ankle. Then he would go out to work with his horses, always making sure she had everything she needed before he left. Ruby spent her days sitting on the covered porch, watching Jake work in the pastures. He had a way with horses that was almost magical. Even the most stubborn animals seemed to calm down when he spoke to them. He never raised his voice or used rough methods. Instead, he was patient and understanding, working with each horse until they learned to trust him. "How do you do that?" Ruby asked one afternoon as Jake came up to the porch after working with a young stallion that had been wild and frightened. When the day began, Jake sat down on the porch steps and took off his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "Horses are a lot like people," he said. "They've all got their own fears and their own reasons for being scared. If you take the time to understand what frightens them, you can help them get past it." Ruby thought about her own fears and how Jake had helped her feel safe when she was terrified and hurt. "Is that what you did with me? In the ravine?" Jake looked at her with those kind, coffee-colored eyes. "You reminded me of a young filly I once found caught in barbed wire. She was hurt and scared, and she didn't trust anybody. But once she realized I wasn't going to hurt her, she let me help. Sometimes that's all it takes." As the days passed, Ruby found herself looking forward to Jake's company more and more. In the evenings, after his work was done, he would sit with her on the porch and they would talk about everything and nothing. Jake told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, and about his dreams of raising the finest horses in the territory. Ruby told him about her family's farm, about helping her mother in the garden and teaching her little brother to read. She talked about the books she loved and her dream of someday seeing the ocean. Jake listened to every word as if it was the most important thing he had ever heard. On the third evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jake said something that made Ruby's heart skip. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Maybe you don't have to leave right away when your ankle is better." Ruby looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Jake turned to face her, his expression serious but hopeful. "This ranch is a lot of work for one person. I could use help. With the horses and with the house. And it." He paused as if searching for the right words. "Never met anyone like you, Ruby. These past few days have been the best I've had in years." Ruby's heart began to race. She had been thinking the same thing, but she had not dared to hope that Jake might feel the same way. "Jake, I." Before she could finish, they heard the sound of horses approaching fast. Jake stood up quickly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Aye!" "Stay here," he told Ruby, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. 3 riders came into view, and Ruby's blood turned to ice. It was the scarred man and 2 of his friends, the ones who had kidnapped her. They pulled their horses to a stop in front of the porch, their faces hard and angry. Well, well," the scarred man said, his voice like gravel. "Looks like we found our little runaway. And she's made herself a friend." Ruby, his body tense and ready. "You men are on my property without permission. I suggest you leave now." The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're not leaving without what belongs to us. That girl owes us money, same as her. Daddy did." "She doesn't owe you anything," Jake said, his voice steady but cold, "and neither did her father. Everyone in 3 counties knows you're nothing but thieves and liars." The scarred man's face darkened. "You got a smart mouth, cowboy? Maybe we need to teach you some manners?" He started to reach for his gun, but Jake was faster in one smooth motion. Jake drew his pistol and had it pointed at the scarred man's chest. "I wouldn't if I were you," Jake said calmly. "I'm faster than all. 3 of you, and we both know it." The other 2 men shifted nervously in their saddles, but the scarred man just smiled. "Can't watch her all the time, cowboy. Sooner or later you'll have to sleep and we'll be waiting." "No, you won't," Jake said, "'cause I sent word too. The sheriff 3 days ago about what you did, he's got warrants out for all 3 of you. If you're smart, you'll ride out of this territory and never come back." Ruby could see the uncertainty flicker across the scarred man's face. He had not expected Jake to involve the law. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Finally, the scarred man spat on the ground and wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he called back as the 3 men rode away. "We'll be back, and next time there won't be any sheriff to hide behind." Jake kept his gun drawn until the men disappeared over the hill. Then he turned to Ruby, who was shaking with fear and anger. "Are you all right?" Ruby stood up, her injured ankle forgotten. "They'll never leave me alone, will they? They'll keep coming back, and someday they might hurt you too." Tears started running down her face. "I should go home tomorrow. I shouldn't have stayed here so long." Jake holstered his gun and came to her, taking her hands in his. "Ruby, look at me." She raised her eyes to his face. "I'm not afraid of those men, and I'm not going to let them hurt you ever. But Jake, what if... ... Double quotes, no what ifs." Jake said firmly, "I meant what I said earlier. I want you to stay here with me. Not just until your ankle heals, but for good. I want to marry you, Ruby." Ruby stared at him in shock. "Marry me?" "But Jake, we've only known each other for 3 days." Jake smiled, the first real smile she had seen since the men rode up. "Sometimes 3 days is enough to know everything that matters. I know you're brave and kind and strong. I know you make me want to be a better man. And I know that I don't. Want to spend another day without you?" Ruby felt her heart swell with happiness and fear all at the same time. She had never expected to find love like this, especially not after such a terrible experience. Ruby looked into Jake's eyes and saw nothing but honesty and love. Her heart wanted to say yes immediately, but her mind was full of worries and fears. "Jake, what if those men come back? What if they hurt you because of me? I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you." Jake squeezed her hands gently. Ruby, listen to me. Those men are cowards. They prey on people who can't fight back. But they're not going to risk a real fight with someone who can shoot straight and isn't afraid of them. They'll move on to easier targets. But what if you're wrong? Then we'll deal with it together, Jake said. I'm not going to live my life in fear, and I don't want you to either. We can't let bad people control our happiness, Ruby thought about. What her life would be like if she went back home. She would always be looking over her shoulder, always afraid that those men might come back. Her family would worry constantly, and she would never feel truly safe. But here with Jake, she felt protected and loved. I need time to think, Ruby said finally. This is all happening so fast. Jake nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. If you want to go home, I'll make sure you get there safely. If you want to stay, I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. That night, Ruby lay awake in the small guest room Jake had given her, staring at the ceiling and thinking. Through the window, she could see the stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on black velvet. Everything was so quiet and peaceful here, so different from the noise and chaos of the past few days. She thought about Jake and the way he had rescued her when she was at her most frightened and desperate. She thought about his gentle hands, when he examined her ankle, his patient voice when he worked with the horses, and his strong arms when he had carried her to safety. She had never known a man could be so strong and yet so tender at the same time. But she also thought about her family. Her parents had raised her with love and care, and they would be heartbroken if she decided to stay here instead of coming home. Her little brother would miss her terribly, and her sister needed her help with the farm work. The next morning, Jake was unusually quiet as he brought Ruby her breakfast. She could see the worry in his eyes, though he tried to hide it with a smile. Sleep well? He asked. Not really, Ruby admitted. I did a lot of thinking. Jake sat down across from her, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. And what did you decide? Ruby took a deep breath. I want to send a message to my parents. I want to ask them to come here so they can meet you. Jake's face lit up with hope. Does that mean ... It means I'm not ready to make such a big decision without them knowing about it, Ruby said. If I'm going to marry you, I want my family to know the man I'm choosing. And I want you to know them too. Jake smiled, and Ruby felt her heart skip at the sight. That sounds perfect. I'll ride into town today and send word to them. 3 days later, Ruby was sitting on the porch mending one of Jake's shirts when she saw a wagon approaching in the distance. Her heart leaped as she recognized her father's team of horses and her mother's blue dress. She stood up, forgetting about her ankle, and nearly fell as pain shot through her leg. Jake came running from the barn where he had been grooming horses. Easy there, he said, catching her arm. Your family? Ruby nodded, too excited to speak. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Ruby's father jumped down. He was a tall, lean man with graying hair and kind eyes, much like his daughter's. Ruby's mother was right behind him, a small woman with gentle hands and a warm smile. Ruby, her mother cried, rushing up the porch steps to embrace her daughter. Oh, sweetheart, we were so worried. Are you all right? Are you hurt? I'm fine, Mama, Ruby said, hugging her mother tightly. My ankle was sprained, but it's much better. Now, her father looked at Jake with careful eyes. You must be the man who helped my daughter. Jake stepped forward and extended his hand. Jake Wilson, sir. I'm honored to meet you. Ruby's father shook Jake's hand, studying his face. David Campbell, and this is my wife, Mary. We owe you a debt we can never repay. No debt at all, Jake said. Mary Campbell looked around at the neat ranch and well-kept buildings. You have a beautiful place here, Mr. Wilson. Thank you, ma'am. Would you like to come inside? You must be tired from the journey. Over dinner that evening, Jake told Ruby's parents the whole story of how he had found her and rescued her from the men who had kidnapped her. He was modest about his own role, but Ruby could see that her parents were impressed by his honesty and kindness. Those men, David said, his face darkening. They came to our farm about a week before they took Ruby, said I owed them money from gambling debts, but I've never gambled a day in my life. When I told them that, they said they'd find another way to collect. They're gone now, Jake said. The sheriff ran them out of the territory. They won't bother your family again. After dinner, Ruby walked with her parents around the ranch while Jake tended to their horses. Mary admired the flower garden Jake had planted near the house, while David looked over the pastures and barns with the eye of a man who knew good farming when he saw it. "He's a good man, Ruby," her father said quietly. "I can see it in the way he looks at you, and in the way he talks about his work and his land. He asked me to marry him, Papa," Ruby said. "I wanted you and Mama to know before I gave him an answer." Mary took her daughter's hand. "And what does your heart tell you?" Ruby looked back toward the house where Jake was sitting on the porch, waiting patiently for them to return. "It tells me that I've never felt as safe and happy as I do when I'm with him. But it also tells me that I'll miss you and Papa and little Tommy terribly if I stay here." "Sweetheart," David said, "you're a grown woman now. Your mother and I raised you to make your own choices and live your own life. If this man makes you happy, then that's what matters to us. But we're so far apart," Ruby said. "I might not see you for months at a time."
"Oh."
Mary smiled. "The distance between here and our farm is not so great that we can't visit. And maybe someday Jake will be able to bring you home for visits too." That evening, as they all sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ruby felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Her parents liked Jake, and she could see that he was making an effort to get to know them as well. The conversation flowed easily, with Jake asking about their farm and their other children, and her parents asking about his horses and his plans for the ranch. When it was time for bed, Ruby's parents retired to the guest room while Ruby and Jake walked out to the pasture fence under the starlight. "Your parents are wonderful people," Jake said. "I can see where you get your strength and kindness. They like you too," Ruby said. "Papa told me you're a good man." Jake turned to face her in the moonlight. "Ruby, I know this is all happening fast, but I need you to know something. I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be the best man I can be." Ruby looked into his eyes and made her decision. Ruby reached up and touched Jake's face gently, feeling the roughness of his day-old beard under her fingertips. "Jake, I've made my decision," she said softly. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jake's eyes widened with joy and disbelief. "Are you sure? Really sure?" Ruby nodded, smiling through the tears of happiness that had started to fall. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You saved me from those terrible men, but you did more than that. You showed me what real love looks like." Jake swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. It was Ruby's first kiss. It was everything she had dreamed it would be. The next morning at breakfast, Ruby and Jake announced their engagement to her parents. Mary cried happy tears and hugged them both, while David shook Jake's hand firmly and welcomed him to the family. "When were you thinking of having the wedding?" Mary asked. Ruby and Jake looked at each other. They had been so caught up in the joy of their engagement that they had not talked about the practical details. Soon Jake said, "I don't want to wait long, but I want to do it right, with both our families there." David nodded approvingly. "How about next month? That would give us time to make arrangements and let the rest of the family know." "Next month sounds perfect," Ruby said, squeezing Jake's hand under the table. Over the next few days, Ruby's parents stayed at the ranch and helped plan the wedding. Mary and Ruby spent hours talking about dresses and flowers and food, while David and Jake worked together repairing fences and discussing the future of the ranch. Ruby was amazed at how easily Jake fit in with her family. He listened to her father's advice about farming and asked thoughtful questions about their life back home. He was patient with her mother's endless questions about the wedding, and respectful of all their traditions and customs. On the day before, her parents were to return home to make wedding preparations. Ruby and her mother were sitting in the garden picking vegetables for dinner when Mary said something that surprised her. "Ruby, I want you to know that your father and I think you're making the right choice." Ruby looked up from the tomatoes she was picking. "You do?" "Yes," Mary said. "When your father and I got married, we had known each other for 2 years. We thought that was the right way to do things, to take plenty of time and be very careful. But watching you and Jake these past few days, I can see something we never had." "What's that?" Mary smiled. "You to understand each other in a way that can't be taught or learned over time. It's just there, like you were meant to find each other. Some people search their whole lives for that kind of connection and never find it. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so afraid you and Papa would think I was being foolish, rushing into marriage with a man I barely know. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet," Mary said. "And sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that feel scary but right at the same time." That evening, Ruby walked her parents to their wagon as they prepared to leave for home. Little Tommy, Ruby's 8-year-old brother, had sent a carved wooden horse as a wedding gift for Jake, and Ruby's older sister had sewn a beautiful quilt as a wedding present. "Tell them I miss them already," Ruby said, hugging her parents goodbye. "And tell them I can't wait for them to meet Jake at the wedding." "We will," David promised. "And Ruby, if you ever need anything at all, you just send word. This ranch may be your home now, but you'll always be our daughter." After her parents left, Ruby and Jake spent the evening on the porch making final plans for their wedding. The ceremony would be held at the little church in town, followed by a celebration at the ranch. Jake's brother was coming from Texas with his family, and all of Ruby's family would make the journey from their farm. "Are you nervous?" Jake asked, taking Ruby's hand. Ruby considered the question. "A little," she admitted. "Everything's changing so fast. A week ago, I was just a farmer's daughter, living at home with my parents. Now I'm about to become a wife and help run a ranch. Having second thoughts?" Ruby shook her head firmly. "No, not at all. I'm nervous, but I'm also excited. I can't wait to start our life together." Jake smiled and kissed her hand. "What do you want our life to be like?" Ruby thought about it. "I want us to have a house full of laughter and love. I want to help you with the horses and learn everything you can teach me about ranching. I want to plant a big garden and maybe raise some chickens. And someday I want children who will grow up loving this land as much as you do." That sounds like the perfect life to me," Jake said. The weeks before the wedding passed quickly. Ruby threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. Jake taught her how to ride properly, how to care for the horses, and how to manage the business side of the ranch. Ruby was a quick learner, and Jake was amazed at how naturally she took to ranch work. Ruby also worked hard to make the ranch house feel more like a home. She hung curtains in the windows, planted more flowers in the garden, and rearranged the furniture to make the rooms more comfortable and welcoming. Jake watched her transforming his simple bachelor home into a real family home, and he fell more in love with her every day. When Jake's brother Ben arrived from Texas with his wife Lucy and their 3 children, Ruby was nervous about meeting Jake's family, but her worries disappeared the moment she met them. Ben had the same kind eyes as Jake, and Lucy immediately made Ruby feel like a sister. "Jake's told us so much about you," Lucy said. "He wrote that you were beautiful and kind, but he didn't mention how perfect you are for him." Children were fascinated by the ranch and spent their time following Jake around as he worked. Ruby watched from the porch as Jake patiently answered their endless questions. She could see what kind of father he would be someday. On the morning of the wedding, Ruby woke before dawn. She was too excited to sleep. Lucy found her in the kitchen and sat down beside her. "Wedding day nerves?" Lucy asked. Ruby nodded. "Keep thinking about how much my life is about to change?" "You're not becoming a different person," Lucy said gently. "You're becoming the person you were always meant to be." Ruby's mother arrived early with the wedding dress she had sewn, a beautiful creation of white silk with delicate lace trim. As Mary helped Ruby into the dress, both women had tears in their eyes. "You look absolutely beautiful," Mary whispered. "Your grandmother would be so proud." The ceremony was held in the afternoon at the small white church in town. Ruby's father walked her down the aisle, and she had eyes only for Jake, who stood waiting at the altar in his best black suit. When it came time for the vows, Jake's voice was strong and clear. "Ruby, I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life." Ruby's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "Jake, I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes. I promise to love you with all my heart." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Ruby gently while their families cheered. The celebration afterward was everything Ruby had dreamed it would be. As the sun set, Ruby and Jake slipped away from the party and walked to their favorite spot by the pasture fence. "Mrs. Wilson," Jake said, trying out Ruby's new name. Ruby smiled. I like the sound of that. 1 year later, Ruby stood in the same spot by the pasture fence, but everything had changed. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had escaped through the dark forest. She was Mrs. Jake Wilson, a confident ranch wife who could ride as well as any cowboy and manage the business side of the ranch with skill and wisdom. The Double J Ranch had prospered under their joint care. Jake's reputation as a horse trainer had spread throughout the territory, and people came from hundreds of miles away to buy his animals. Ruby had proven to have a natural talent for breeding and raising horses, and she had established a successful business selling gentle riding horses to families in the surrounding towns. Their house had grown too. Jake had added 2 more rooms and a bigger kitchen to accommodate the family they both hoped to have someday. Ruby's flower gardens were now famous in 3 counties, and her vegetable garden provided food for their table year-round. But the biggest change was not in the ranch or the house. It was in Ruby herself. The scared young woman who had once hidden behind a rock in a ravine had become a strong, confident woman who could face any challenge. She had learned to shoot a rifle as well as any man could, doctored sick animals, and had even helped deliver a neighbor's baby when the town doctor could not be reached in time. On this particular morning, Ruby was watching Jake work with a difficult stallion in the corral. The horse had been brought to them by a desperate owner who said the animal was too wild to be useful. But Ruby could see that Jake was making progress. The stallion's eyes were calmer, and he was no longer fighting the rope. He's beautiful, said a voice behind her. Ruby turned to see her friend Anne, who lived on a nearby ranch with her husband and 4 children. Anne visited often, and the 2 women had become close friends despite their different backgrounds. Jake says he'll be ready to ride within the month, Ruby said. I've never seen him work with a horse this difficult before, but he never gives up. Anne studied Ruby's face. You look happy? Really happy? Ruby smiled. I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. No regrets about leaving your family's farm? Ruby shook her head. None at all. I miss my family, of course, but they visit often, and we go there for holidays. This is where I belong now. This ranch, this life, this man, it's everything. I never knew I wanted, as if he had heard them talking about him. Jake looked up from his work and waved. Ruby waved back, her heart still skipping a beat at the sight of his smile. After a year of marriage, she loved him more than ever. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake had news to share. Got a letter from the sheriff today, he said. Those men who kidnapped you? They were caught trying to rob a bank down in El Paso. They'll be in prison for a long time. Ruby felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even realized was still there. Good, she said firmly. I hope they learn to make an honest living while they're there. Jake squeezed her hand. You're not afraid anymore, are you? Ruby thought about the question. A year ago, she might have still jumped at shadows or worried about those men returning. But now, sitting here with her husband on their own land, surrounded by everything they had built together, she felt only strength and peace. No, she said. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. Jake smiled. That's my brave girl, Ruby laughed. Remember when you said I reminded you of a frightened filly caught in barbed wire? I remember. What do I remind you of now? Jake considered the question seriously. Now you remind me of Thunder. Strong, confident, beautiful, and completely free. As autumn turned to winter, Ruby and Jake settled into the comfortable rhythms of married life. They worked together during the day, managing the ranch and caring for their growing herd of horses. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Ruby mending clothes or reading while Jake worked on leather repair or planned improvements to the ranch. They talked about everything, their hopes for the future, memories of the past, and plans for expanding the ranch. Ruby had ideas for breeding horses that would be perfect for families with children, gentle animals that could teach young people to ride safely. Jake wanted to build a bigger barn and add more pastures to accommodate their growing business. But, mostly, they talked about their love for each other and their gratitude for the chance encounter that had brought them together. They both knew that if Ruby had not escaped from that cabin, if Jake had not been riding through the forest that morning, if any of a dozen small things had been different, they might never have found each other. Do you think it was fate, Ruby asked one snowy evening as they sat by the fire. What do you mean all of it? Me being kidnapped, escaping through the forest, you finding me in the ravine? You think we were meant to find each other? Jake put down the bridle he was repairing and looked at her thoughtfully. I think he said slowly that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in our lives. If those men hadn't taken you, you never would have been in that forest, and I never would have found you. Ruby nodded. I used to have nightmares about that night in the forest, but now when I think about it, I'm almost grateful it happened. Without it, I would never have known what real love feels like. On Christmas morning, Jake gave Ruby a special gift. It was a beautiful mare, golden in color with a white mane, gentle and perfectly trained for a lady to ride. She's yours, Jake said as Ruby ran her hands over the mare's silky coat. I've been training her specially for you. Her name is Dawn, because she represents the beginning of our life together. Ruby threw her arms around Jake's neck, tears of joy streaming down her face. She's perfect. But Jake, I didn't get you anything nearly this wonderful. Jake smiled and kissed her softly. Ruby, you are my gift. Every day I wake up next to you. Every evening I come home to you. Every moment we spend together, that's the greatest gift I could ever receive. As spring returned to the ranch, Ruby discovered she was expecting their first child. Jake was so excited he could hardly contain himself. He immediately began making plans for a nursery and talking about teaching their son or daughter to ride. Do you know it will be interested in horses? Ruby teased. Because it's our child, Jake said confidently. Horses will be in its blood. Ruby spent the spring and summer preparing for the baby while continuing to help with the ranch work. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Jake built a beautiful wooden cradle that would rock gently beside their bed. Their families were thrilled with the news. Ruby's parents visited frequently, and her mother helped prepare everything they would need for the baby. Jake's brother and sister-in-law sent gifts and promised to come for the birth. On a warm September day, exactly 2 years after Jake had found Ruby in the forest, their daughter was born. She was small and perfect, with Jake's dark hair and Ruby's bright eyes. They named her Hope because she represented all their dreams for the future coming true. As Ruby held her daughter for the first time, with Jake sitting beside them both, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of that night in the forest to the perfect peace of this moment, her life had been transformed completely. Thank you, she whispered to Jake. For what? Ruby looked around at their beautiful home, thought about their successful ranch, and looked down at their perfect daughter sleeping in her arms. For everything. For saving me. For loving me. For giving me this wonderful life. Jake kissed them both gently. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to stay. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for making me the happiest man alive. Outside, thunder whinnied in the pasture, and Dawn answered with a gentle nicker. The sun was setting over their land, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside their home, Ruby and Jake sat together with their daughter, surrounded by the love they had built together, grateful for every moment that had led them to this perfect happiness.